Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's continue with the next chapter of the Occult Investigator, Real Cases from the Files of Ex-Investigations book by Bob Johnson. This one having to do with chapter 6. In fact, looking at the information associated with it, this is really neat stuff. Apparently it has to do with a computer that actually is almost haunted or possessed and looks into people's lives and may even steal their souls. I mean, when I was reading this information, I just knew this was going to be a really good chapter to feature here. So I'm going to go ahead and split it into two parts. We'll do part 1 here and then part 2 the next go around, and then I'll give my thoughts and opinions on it at the end of this video. Let me know what you guys think too as far as this chapter. Interesting stuff. In fact, the title of it is The Computer That Stole Souls. Gives you an idea essentially of what it's going to be about, right? Let's go ahead and let's feature that chapter here. And then again, I'll give my thoughts and comments on it afterward. So here's what it states. Peter and Gary were the owners of Digital Doctor's computer repair service in a small New England town. It was one of the few such places in their area that actually made house calls to the technologically inept or phobic. The brothers would go to a home or office, try to figure out what was wrong with a person's machine, and if they could, they repair it on the spot. A long-forgotten style of service that harkened back to the days of medical doctor house calls and even TV repair services. So when they got the call from Charles Higgins, they didn't think twice about visiting his home, and according to the brothers, they felt good that they were able to help people in their community and have a business at the same time. In Higginson's case, the call was especially fulfilling to the pair because they liked the idea that a senior citizen, an 81-year-old widower, actually used a computer, and they were curious as to how technically proficient the old gent really was. I called the brothers to the store after I received a note from them saying they had seen an article on Ex-Investigations in one of their wives' magazines. They told me a bizarre tale of a haunted or possessed computer that they feared actually stole people's souls and infiltrated their lives. I admit that the Digital Doctor's brother's story sounded like an episode of The Twilight Zone, but that's what made it so much more appealing to me than a typical haunting or poltergeist tale. Peter started his eerie recollection of the events by explaining that their service truck had rolled up to Old Man Higgins's house around 5:30 p.m. one November afternoon in 1997. Of course, it was typically gloomy, cold, and dark, but it was the last call of the day on the brothers' schedule. At least it would probably be an easy repair. How complicated could an 81-year-old's computer problem be? Peter thought to himself, so the job would no doubt being easy into the day, and Higgins lived in a large frame house in serious disrepair. The house needed fixing a lot more than any computer did, and Peter made a mental note to pass on his handyman buddy's telephone number. When they walked up to the creaking front doors and then peered through the glass panes of the huge wooden front door, the house was so dark inside that the brothers at first thought no one was home. But they spotted a dim light coming from a far-off corner in the back of the house. Gary tried the doorbell but heard no ringing, so he knocked on the door first gently and then pounding, figuring the old guy was hard of hearing. Higgins finally shuffled to the door, opened it a crack, and asked the brothers if they were the computer geeks. Peter and Gary were both amused and a little surprised by the senior's terminology. He was quite an amusing old guy. He was far more hip than we ever imagined, and he knew quite a bit about his computer, despite the fact that it was an original Apple Macintosh machine with only 128K capacity, a relic in the market nowadays. Frankly, if we knew it was that dated, we would have never bothered to come out, but Higgins simply said he had an Apple system that needed a lot of work. And so the brothers entered the dark old house and followed Higgins to the back, where he had a musty-smelling study set up with a chair, a desk, a standing floor lamp, and the blue glow from the Apple computer that supplied the only light in the room. As they moved closer to the desk, Peter and Gary were creeped out by how the computer seemed to dominate the space. They later agreed that it was just an illusion because the screen had been the main source of light in an otherwise huge dark space. But once the brothers started connecting the machine to a dev and the odd occurrences in their own lives, they wondered whether their first impression might have been some sort of warning from a supernatural source. They asked Higgins where he had gotten such an old machine. He explained that it had been given to him by Silka, his deceased wife's friend, after she was having problems with it. Yeah, Silka was a real anxious to get rid of the computer. She said she got it from one of the kooky friends she hung around with. She was one of those psychic types, always running around with crazy witches and such, old Higgins told him. He then described how the computer was acting funny, not shutting down when he typed in the command, turning itself on in the middle of the night, and most peculiar was how it would pop up web pages from the internet that Higgins said he never searched. I know it's an old machine, but it's doing stuff that I never tell it to do, which just ain't natural, Higgins explained. You geeks gotta take her out of here and fix her up, 'cause I ain't got a lot of time left and there's lots I want to see on the internet before I go. And it ain't all this stuff about black magic and weird hoodoo that this Mac keeps popping up on the screen from the internet either. Despite the fact that the machine couldn't really be fixed and their polite explanation to Higgins that maybe he should just buy a new computer, the digital doctors decided that they would at least go through the motions, take the computer to the shop, and then call the old guy and tell him they couldn't fix it. Gary said to me that what he really wanted to do was just give Higgins a refurbished machine they had in the shop as a replacement and then dump the old Mac because it was virtually worthless. But oddly enough, when they were leaving, Higgins said something to them that started to them thinking that there was a lot more to the computer's strange behavior than some technical glitch or perhaps Higgins's mistakes. Okay, boys, be careful with her. She tells me things that come true, things that are going to happen, and then they do. And some things I don't really want to hear too, some scary things. But it told me something recently that's the most important thing I ever heard, but I ain't heard it all yet. So you boys fix it up soon. You know I ain't got a lot of time left like I told you, and that computer's got a mind of its own. Now the old Mac computer sat on the workbench of digital doctors for about a week. The brothers were too busy to deal with it, and they contemplated calling old Higgins and telling him it couldn't be fixed, delivering their refurbished machine to him, and then calling it a day. But by the middle of week 2, they began to get suspicious as to why Higgins hadn't inquired about his machine, since he seemed so anxious to have it repaired and to get the answer he was looking for. They really didn't believe the Mac was communicating with the old gent, dismissing this beliefs as some senile leanings, but they did feel he was sincere about wanting that computer back. Peter decided to take the new computer over to the house and explain the switch to Higgins. He drove up at the end of the workday and grabbed the refurbished machine out of the back of his truck. Peter noticed something hanging on Higgins' front door, and his worst suspicions were confirmed as he got closer. A purple bowed death ref hung on the front door, an uncommon sight nowadays, but still traditional in their small community. Peter put the computer on the porch floor and read the notice tacked on the brown door that said that Higgins had died the prior week. Peter was saddened but not shocked, considering Higgins' age. The next morning, glancing at the old Mac sitting on the workbench, Peter told Gary about Higgins' death. He told me he was curious about the machine and powered it up just to see if it had any life left. The old Apple icon appeared, and to Peter's surprise, the machine seemed to be in good working condition. Peter thought the machine might be a good computer for his 9-year-old son Robbie to learn on, so he called his wife and told her to drop the boy off at the shop after school that day so he could become familiar with the Mac. Robbie was enthusiastic about having his own machine to use, and Peter didn't have to worry about him breaking it. The boy was familiar with the basics. He even knew how to open files and move documents, but what Peter told me next was something he thought was peculiar even for an old computer. Whenever Robbie tried to open a file, it wouldn't respond except for one file labeled Magus, but that was the least of the machine's weird behavior. Peter recalled how Higgins had complained about the computer having a mind of its own and opening pages about magic and witchcraft, but what he saw in the file labeled Magus that his son opened on a small screen completely freaked him out. The first page contained what looked like instructions for a ritual of some kind. There were arcane symbols and incantations that spoke of the afterlife and the hand of glory, which I knew from occult lore to be the primary ingredient in necromantic workings or magical spells to raise the dead. The hand of glory is traditionally the severed hand of a criminal corpse, usually one who has been hanged until dead. The hand is preserved and said to have incredibly potent occult power. And if this wasn't disturbing enough, especially since Peter exposed it to his young son, on the last page of the file he saw a name in large letters that was the obvious focal point of the spell. It read Randolph Higgins, that old man's name. At this point in the brothers' story, I was intrigued, but not interested enough to devote my time to them because I really didn't think there was anything that could be considered paranormal or occult-based aside from the necromantic computer files. These might have been nothing more than files kept by an individual interested in the occult. And the fact that Higgins' name was in the ritual instructions could have been his own doing. Much stranger things have been discovered in people's computers files, I reasoned. I pressed the brothers for something much more unusual that might warrant my investigation, and then I got it. Peter told me that next to Higgins' name was the date November 9th, 1997. That was the day Higgins died. My first thought was that Higgins' death was a suicide because that could explain the date and that Higgins himself could have entered it into the document. But Peter and Gary said they had checked with the local coroner and the old man had died of heart failure with no indication of suicide. But this possible coincidence alone wasn't what spurred the brothers to seek outside help. After some time passed and the Higgins mystery was just about forgotten, Robbie continued to use the computer in what Peter described as bordering on an obsessive way. He would run to the shop from school and get right on the machine, sometimes staying on it for 3 hours or more before we went home to dinner. At first, we were happy that he showed such interest, but he had access to computers before and never exhibited so much enthusiasm and intense concentration, Peter said. He told me that at dinner one evening they had asked Robbie why he loved working on the old Mac so much. At first, he'd been reluctant to explain, but after some prodding by his parents, Robbie told him that the machine told him to promise not to say anything to anyone about their secret. Now annoyed at their child's odd behavior and reticence, they pressured Robbie to come clean. Peter said their son finally told him that the computer wrote his name by itself on files in the machine. But I wasn't supposed to tell that it talks with me because something bad might happen, he told his parents. This alone was odd, but still not bizarre. Some children do have intense imaginations. But the day after Peter's son confessed to his strange relationship with the Mac, a bad thing did in fact happen. Riding his bicycle home from school, Robbie was struck by a car and fell into a coma. Was this another coincidence? Peter turned on the old Mac and then frantically searched for the files his son said it had created in the machine. Chills ran down his spine when he saw a page that was similar with Higgins' name and the day he died. This time, it had Robbie's name on the page, and the date was the day Robbie was struck by the automobile. With the revelation of Peter's son's accident, what could have been coincidence now took on a decided air of mystery for me. If there wasn't something supernatural occurring in the town, there could have been a cruel hoax being played on the digital doctor's brothers, and part of the X-Investigation's charter was to expose scams as much as solve occult cases. So I made arrangement to visit the New England town to investigate how an old computer could possibly have the date of its owner's death before the man died and what the occult necromantic connection might be. Was this why Higgins was so eager to learn from the machine? Was he an occult practitioner or the victim of some malevolent force? I was on another adventure that this time bridged the world of the occult with the world of technology. Before I left New York, I asked Vincent to have some of the staff at the detective agency do some background work for me so I'd be prepared when I went up north. Vincent advised me that most cases that turn out to be hoaxes usually begin with someone who has a history of scamming and grifting, so I wanted to be prepared if this was the case. And although there didn't seem to be any monetary angle involved, there had been a death and an accident, signs that could be the work of a seriously demented con man. I managed to find out the names of all of the parties involved with the possessed computer, and they all checked out clean. The one question mark was Silka, Higgins' wife's friend, who had given the old man this Macintosh computer in the first place. Silka had some minor charges on her record concerning her involvement with unlawful gatherings in nearby woods, usually witchcraft or Wiccan ceremonies, and a charge for grave robbery that was lessened to a misdemeanor with the explanation that she had been guilty of participating in a rather intense Halloween party scavenger hunt. Although Silka's record appeared innocent enough on paper, the two offenses were hallmarks of occult involvement. Her record, coupled with the current events, pointed to Silka as the first person I needed to speak with concerning Higgins' mysterious computer and Peter's son's accident. When I arrived at the digital doctor's shop, Gary met me and explained that Peter was at the hospital visiting his son, who was happily beginning to show signs of improvement. Gary said he was pleased to see me because things were getting very strange ever since the old computer entered the shop. He told me that he and his brother were apprehensive about discussing their suspicions. We talked to each other about this damn thing and how we think it's evil, but then we think we're going nuts. But there are just too many coincidences to blow it off, Gary said. I mentioned that I thought the Higgins event was strange, but could have been a coincidence, but I agreed that the boys' accident was extremely odd, and that's when I got spooked. Gary then surprised me by saying there was even more to the story. Since you spoke to Peter, we started experiencing what the old man was telling us. We really took this thing apart and looked into every file on its drive. But there's weird stuff going on. We shut the computer off at night, but then it's on when we get into the office in the morning. We close down the file and then find it open again minutes later. And one night, I swear, I unplugged the son of a bitch only to find it plugged back in and turned on within hours. It's just too bizarre, Gary said. I asked if there could be some technical glitch or power surge type of anomaly that could make the computer act so crazy, but Gary assured me that they had checked the machine out thoroughly and there was nothing electronically wrong with it. The old Mac did indeed appear to have a mind of its own. My inquiry was far more concerned with the magical files that contain Higgins's and the boys' name, and of course what Silka's role was in this macabre Mac. I suspected that Silka was either the source of the computer's malevolent behavior or at the very least a significant piece of the puzzle. Gary was right. There were far too many unexplained events to chalk up to coincidence. And then that's it. Let's go ahead and let's wrap up this for part 1 of chapter 6 called The Computer That Stole Souls from the book Occult Investigator, Real Cases from the Files of X Investigations by Bob Johnson. So what do you guys think? Nice little tease, nice little setup, right, when it comes to this story. Here you have a situation where this digital doctor's shop and the brothers, they were called over to a house of an old man. The old man said he needed a computer fixed. And then it's almost like peeling the onions when it comes to the mystery growing more and more as far as that computer almost having a mind of its own, almost seeming paranormal from the get-go, and then finally leading to those bizarre and unfortunate circumstances involving, one, the old man being killed, like in other words, chalk it up to suicide, but I mean not suicide, but having some other type of strange occurrence leading up to his death, and then you have the poor boy getting hit by a car and then going into a coma. Both events seemingly being told by the computer that would happen within its files. Immediately, though, just like you and me probably, I'm thinking of this, that it's something else, like there's a hacker or someone else that is causing this type of situation, just thinking more in the real world sense. So it'll be interesting to see if this plays out in part 2 of this chapter and then see if it truly is that angle. And if not, if it's something else involving, let's say, something more supernatural, well, that'll be interesting to see too. How does that play into the world of a computer? Like right now, those of you on the computer right now, or on a laptop or anything like that. Imagine thinking that this thing is alive. It's watching you, and it's in turn trying to figure out like how to do something bad towards you. All in all, pretty interesting stuff. So let's go ahead then. I'll leave it here. Love to hear what your guys' comments are, and then I'll do chapter 2 on the next go around. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.